This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
Good evening, I'm Ali Miraj. You're listening to LBC and this is Cross Question. Joining me on the panel this evening are Sir Robert Goodwill on my left, a Conservative MP for Scarborough and Whitby, who is Chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee. Also to my left, Zoe Grünewald, political reporter for the new Statesman. She also used to work at the House of Commons. On my right, not politically, of course, Justin Madders, Shadow Employment Rights Minister and Labour MP for Ellesmere, Port and Neston. And also on the right is Ryan Shorthouse, founder and chief executive of the centre-right think tank Bright Blue. That's the panel. You might want to ask our panellists about Rishi Sunak's announcement that the government is buying 2 more barges to house refugees in, and that small boat crossings on the Channel are down by a fifth. We were discussing that in the last hour. The new trial of a universal basic income, which will see 30 people paid £1,600 a month to use whatever they want to, and then they can earn money on top of that through working. Unions also saying that Labour are being naive to want to ban any new licences to drill for oil and gas in the North Sea because the effect it will have on jobs. And the TV survival expert Bear Grylls claiming that a lot of what is taught in school is frankly boring and doesn't prepare children for real life. Plus, you're welcome to ask them about anything else which is on your mind this evening. And don't forget, you can watch Cross Question live on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
Yeah, so remember the number is 0345 6060 973. Text on 84850. Let's go to our first question. Akil in Northampton. Good evening. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ali. Good evening, panel. I would like to ask a question to the panel. Bearing in mind the Suella Braverman was being questioned, I believe, a few weeks back by one of her colleagues in regards to there being no safe routes into this country unless you're Ukrainian, Hong Kong and Afghani, then he excludes the rest of the world. How can the government use the legal route of people's coming in when there is no legal ways of coming in?
It's a very good question. We were just touching on that. Thank you, Akil. We were touching on that in the last hour. Sir Robert Goodwill.
Thank you. Well, I was Immigration Minister under Theresa May, and in fact I was very proud of the fact that we did have safe legal routes, particularly people in the refugee camps surrounding Syria. I remember going to Jordan, seeing people in those desperate camps, and those people were chosen by the UNHCR, not by people smuggling gangs. So, if our system wasn't gummed up with people coming here illegally, I think we could do more of that. Countries like Canada, who don't have, a short sea crossing to where lots of people are trying to get into the country, have great schemes like that. So I think if we can, clear the backlog, we can stop these boats coming across the channel, then we can actually show that generosity that's already, we've got people coming from Hong Kong, people from Afghanistan, and a lot of people from Ukraine, incidentally, who want to go back to Ukraine when peace is restored. So I think if we can get this fixed and we can stop the boats, we can then look at safe legal routes for people who are in genuine need, not the people who just have the biggest checkbooks to pay the people smugglers.
And Sir Robert, if you also, I don't know if you were listening to it in the last hour, Ben from Brighton was asking this question about the legality. This is often said that these people are arriving here illegally, and under the Refugee Convention they can go to any country they want. What is your answer to that particular charge, that they're not illegal at all? They can come and claim asylum wherever they want to?
Well, no, under the Refugee Convention, they should claim asylum in the first safe country they reach. Last time I looked, France was not an unsafe country. A lot of the people are fleeing for economic reasons. Some are fleeing for genuine reasons. But the problem is we have so many, a big proportion of the people coming are economic migrants. And that does gum up our system with this big backlog, £6 million a day in terms of hotel accommodation. So we do need to fix the problem. And Rishi's made it one of his 5 priorities to stop the boats. And that's what we should do.
Zoe Grünewald.
Yes, I think there's some interesting points there. I think what is really important is that the government not only takes this issue seriously and tries to find safe and legal routes for people who need to come to this country for their own safety, but also takes a long-term approach to this. So we know over the next few years we're going to see many more people need to claim asylum for reasons of their safety, as we see global conflicts increase, as we see kind of energy security issues. And at the moment it feels like we're just seeing a lot of short-term solutions, trying to stop the boats, trying to get favour at the next general election, but being able to point to the numbers and saying they're going down. But I think there needs to be a more long-term approach about what we're going to do on a global scale at the sheer number of people who are going to need to migrate over the next few years. And that will take international cooperation, not just short-term government approaches.
But Zoe, can I just ask you the same question I just asked Stephen Kinnock, the Shadow Immigration Minister? He was here a few minutes ago. Where are you on the issue of a cap? Because we hear about safe and legal routes, and this is a charge made to the government. There aren't enough of them, but there are millions of people in the world through geopolitical tensions or climate change that might want to come here for multiple reasons. Where are you on the cap issue?
I don't think a cap will work in practice for the reasons I've just said. I think we're going to see vast numbers of people who are going to need to leave their country for their own safety.
We can't take them all.
No, of course. So I think what we do need, going back to my original point, is more international cooperation. So maybe there would be some system where countries have certain quotas of people, but it will need to be an international agreement, and there will need to be countries working with each other. It's simply not viable for a country to say, I am not going to accept X amount of people when we're going to see huge amounts of problems over the next few years. So I would like to see more international cooperation, and I think more the government working with other countries to find sustainable solutions to the migration crisis.
Justin Matters, not enough safe and legal routes.
Well, I think that's probably correct. I think the point Robert's made about the small boats issue clouding the conversation we ought to be having about which countries we want to create safe and legal routes for is right. I think it's also probably the case that the Afghanistan resettlement scheme is not working as well as it should, and I suspect that we won't have a sort of specific issue that we've had in Hong Kong and Ukraine again in the future. But as Zoe has said, there are almost certainly going to be humanitarian, possibly climate disasters over the next decade or so that we're only going to be able to solve if you work internationally.
Do you think the system's fair? Because there is often this argument that the Ukrainians, we took in about 200,000 Ukrainians. We're not so generous with everyone in war zones. Is there a double standard that creeps in?
Well, you can make that argument. I don't think the system at the moment is fair for anyone who is applying for asylum because they're made to wait years, potentially. I've got constituents who have been waiting 6 years for their applications to be decided, and during that time they have absolutely no certainty about what is going to happen with their life. I think a lot of the problems that we have been talking about in recent months are about the failure of the Home Office to actually clear that backlog, and that really, I think, is where the focus should be.
Ryan Shorthouse.
Yeah, I mean, several things. The first is that I think we should take more refugees through legal and safe routes. The UK, compared to other countries, takes relatively less. There are obviously schemes in place for people coming from Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Hong Kong, and then there is a small number that come through the UNCHR resettlement scheme, but that's a very low number. Mm-hmm. And of course we know there are countries which are facing a lot of troubles, whether that's Eritrea, Sudan, Iran, and we must make sure, I think, that there are routes available to them. Now, Robert talked about people who are economic migrants coming as irregular migrants crossing the Channel. And he said a majority, he thinks, well, not necessarily a majority, but a lot of them are coming over economic migrants. But he also said some are genuine refugees. Yes. Yeah. Now, this is why I have a profound problem with what the government's trying to do with the illegal migration bill. And I have on three points. The first is in principle, which is it's basically saying that everybody who comes over, nearly everybody, is inadmissible. So they have to be detained and then deported. Yeah. I think that goes against a British sense of fair play, which is we give people a fair hearing and then we deem whether they should be granted asylum or not a blanket ban. And, you know, at the moment, a certain number of people who try and claim asylum, the government themselves says a majority of them should be given asylum. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second, just pragmatically, the idea of detaining everybody. At the moment, there's about a capacity for just over 2,000. The government wants to double that with detention facilities and barges. The last figures from 2022 suggested that about 50,000 to 70,000 asylum applicants came. The idea that we're going to be able to detain all those asylum seekers, I think, is just nonsense. And then politically, I would say the government is in danger here of raising the salience of an issue and then not being able to deliver on it and saying that they can stop the boats. I think there are ways that you can reduce the number of boats, but stopping the boats and going down to zero, I just think will make people even more angry. You know, the idea of the Rwanda scheme, which costs huge amounts of money, I think the government, what they need to focus on is improving the time that it takes to process asylum claims, and also making sure, I think we're very generous in the amount of asylum acceptances we have compared to other countries. The government needs somebody who can get a grip of the processing, and that is where the priority should be, rather than sort of, kind of showing leg to the media on these big, wild schemes like Rwanda.
So you're nodding.
Yeah, I agree. I think Sunak is in danger of making this issue his top priority and not being able to achieve the record that he's trying to get. He keeps talking about stopping the boats. His government keep talking about stopping the boats. You're not going to be able to stop the boats by the time of the next election. So I think there needs to be a more reasonable discussion about this. I also agree with Ryan that we're at danger of dehumanising refugees and asylum seekers in the way that we talk about them. I think when you talk about them increasingly as numbers, as issues to be solved, you run the risk of creating a lot of tension around the issue. And as I've said, I think we're only going to see more of a crisis with the number of people needing to migrate. So I think having a sort of healthier, more balanced discussion about it and with more realistic targets is a much better direction for the government to be going in.
So, Robert, isn't the processing of the backlog the fundamental issue, as Ryan's highlighted here?
Well, obviously, the fundamental issue is preventing the numbers coming into the system and breaking the business model of the people smuggling gangs. When I was in Nigeria to sign a returns deal with the Nigerian government, the people who overstayed their visas, we had biometric data, there was no doubt who they were. And they told me that the people coming in through the Sahara, through the Mediterranean, across the Channel, weren't the very impoverished people from the north of the country where Boko Haram were causing chaos. They were fairly middle class by Nigerian standards people who could afford to find the £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 they needed to get across. And they told me the best thing we could do is return those young men, and they were pretty much young men, to those villages from where they'd come in Nigeria, and that would send a very clear signal that you're wasting your money paying to get your kids.
Return them to Nigeria, don't send them to Rwanda.
Well, that was a returns agreement because those people had come on visas, they'd overstayed those visas, and we could return them to Nigeria, and that was a deal that we signed. Justin
Madders, you might be in government in a year and a half.
Yes, and this is one of a very long list of things we're going to have to sort out, which will not be straightforward. I just wanted to come back to what Ryan said about this being one of Rishi Sunak's political priorities and how it might rebound on him, because, I mean, let's be clear, today he has picked a very select piece of statistics comparing 5 months of a year, which is pretty unusual, with last year, which of course was the highest number of illegal boat crossings we've had, to say that there's been a drop. The weather could have been part of the explanation for that. The fact is that we are still seeing 3 times as many people coming over on boats as we had 2 years ago, 8 times as many before COVID, and he's got, these 5 priorities, pretty modest priorities, to go into the next election. And I think that cherry-picking statistics when it's an opportune moment may well come back to bite him on the backside.
Well, we'll see. But biting on the backside, sorry, it's conjured up all sorts of images which I'd rather not think about. This is a very civilised panel. Feel free to be a bit more robust with each other. I will promise you I will not interfere too much and just steer the conversation. You're listening to Cross Question. If you want to put a question or a text to our panel, the number's 03456 60973 or text 84850. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:70.
This is LBC. No Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
You're listening to Cross Question. It's 8:18 on LBC, and I'm joined by a stellar panel from left to right here. Sir Robert Goodwill, Conservative MP, Zoe Grünewald from the New Statesman, Justin Matters, for the Labour MP, and also Ryan Shorthouse from the think tank Bright Blue. Our next question is a text question from Danny in Inverness. Who's right about North Sea oil and gas? Labour or the unions? And just a bit of background, in case you missed this story. Labour intends to ban any new licences to drill for oil and gas in the North Sea as part of efforts to transition Britain towards green energy sources and meet our target of becoming net zero by 2050. Existing drilling would be able to continue. Two Labour-supporting unions, Unite and the GMB, have criticised the policy, with the GMB's General Secretary, Gary Smith, calling it naive. Well, I've got to come to you, Justin, on this one.
Yeah, well, I understand why trade unions are always going to be concerned about policies that might impact on the jobs of their members, but I would say that I think that if we handle this transition in a just way, which is what the Labour Party hope to do, there won't be any difficulty. In fact, it will be an opportunity for hundreds of thousands of new jobs in the green industries that we hope to promote as a result of this policy change that will benefit those trade union members. It's about 28 years as an average time from a new gas site to be opened up before it actually becomes operational. So really what we're saying now is, do we really want to be starting new gas sites in the North Sea in the year 2051? I would suggest that we certainly don't, and that is completely inconsistent with our climate change ambitions.
Well, can I just ask you on that? Because are you then in favour of, in the interim period, until we become completely self-sufficient and we solve the issue of baseload power, are you comfortable with taking in liquefied natural gas from Qatar and other places in the Middle East, or wherever it may be from, rather than granting new oil and gas licences?
Well, as I've explained, I don't think there's going to be that question in the interim, because it takes so long to get the gas out of the sea. What we're talking about here is really a situation where we've got the commitments in the Labour Party's manifesto for our Green New Deal to try and really make that step change that we need to fight climate change. It is an opportunity for us to be a global leader. Of course, there will be, difficult choices to make, but I think it is the right thing to do, and it can be done in a way that doesn't harm people's jobs. I think if we start putting policies forward that do that, we will start to lose the public's support, and I think the public at the moment is on side for tackling climate change. So there's no doubt that this is a careful balance, but it's absolutely the right thing to do.
Ryan Shorthouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lesson from the last year or so is the reason why inflation has gone up is because of Europe's reliance on gas, and particularly from Russia, and Putin has been able to use that as a weapon. So I think the big lesson is that we need to wean off gas. That is essential for both sustainable reasons to achieve net zero targets, but also security reasons as well. Now, as has been said, there'll be a continuation of existing sites for oil and gas, because it will still be needed as transition for fuel. Yes. But the trajectory seems to suggest that by mid-century that you would be able to rely on alternative sources, particularly low carbon, zero carbon energy sources, whether that's renewable, and obviously the UK is a world leader on offshore wind. Nuclear as well will be a vital part of that. But it is essential that those things are scaled up, and we also have carbon capture in place as well from fossil fuel energy sources that still exist. So as long as that trajectory is met, then I think Labour's policy around no new oil and gas sites is feasible. But we must make sure that there's the scaling up of the low carbon sources and nuclear. If not, then there's trouble.
Zoe, I just wanted to read you this before you come in on this. Gary Smith, General Secretary of the GMB Union, is joined by Unite's Sharon Graham in criticising this. And in fact, Gary Smith said this: the Labour Party's policies are going to create a cliff edge with oil and gas extraction from the North Sea. Is he right?
Well, I think it goes back to what both Ryan and Justin were saying, which is that we have to make sure we're prepared for the transition. The transition is necessary. We know that there is a real need to move towards net zero and to make good on climate pledges. The Labour Party are pledging a huge amount of money to invest in preventing climate change and creating green new jobs and things like that. We would hope, obviously, that isn't the case, that Gary is wrong. But I think what really this illustrates is that Labour and the unions need to be in really close dialogue where they both understand each other fully about exactly what Starmer means when he says things like that. I think the policy is pretty sensible. I think part of it is just making sure that there's an understanding that any jobs that disappear as a result of this will be then brought along with their 28 billion investment in new green jobs.
Well, it's interesting because today, and I'll come to you on this, Sir Robert, we had Grant Shapps thinking twice about the hydrogen investment because it's going to actually increase everyone's bills. So that's also been brought into this equation as well, right? So if we're going to be going for alternative fuel sources, it's all going to cost us more. What's your view on this?
Well, for once, I'm with the unions on this. Yes,
wow.
Yes,
okay,
yes. Good. We are in the middle of transition, but we can't just replace North Sea gas with gas imported from, fracked gas from America or LPG from the Gulf. And, if we look at technology like carbon capture and storage, that needs gas as a feedstock. You can make hydrogen out of natural gas. And of course, we're looking at offset schemes, particularly agriculture, which is my industry, looking at how we can plant trees and do things to offset that carbon. But what we can't do is allow ourselves to be vulnerable as we were, not as vulnerable as a place like Germany, but vulnerable to the global energy market. So I think the North Sea reserve needs to be used, need to use sustainably. And we must not forget, we talk about nuclear, talk about wind, but they can produce electricity, but the average house has 7 times as much energy going in through the gas main as through the electricity wire. So we need a massive increase in the amount of electricity we can produce. And I don't see that trajectory meeting those requirements in the same way that using gas from the North Sea can, if that's done sustainably.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, Robert has a good point about that. And as I say, the trajectory around low carbon sources has to be met. And CCUS, the other thing about carbon
capture and storage, yeah.
Yes, it's still quite nascent and not.
Well, so is battery storage.
Correct.
So is battery storage.
Yeah, so that, to meet the net zero targets, the CCC, the Committee on Climate Change, is basically betting on CCUS being used in quite a widespread sense. So my view is that as long as we can, some days the amount of energy, the amount of grid, which is the source of it, which is low carbon renewable energy, sometimes is over 50%. We've had that, but we just got to make sure that that's consistent.
That's electricity, not
that's electricity. Yes, yeah, that's electricity. So there is a need, of course, to decarbonise the gas supply as well. And hydrogen is obviously one source, and there's been some trials around heating using hydrogen, and that's proving quite promising.
But Grant Shapps is saying it's going to cost us all more. He's thinking twice about it now.
Yeah, and we need to be, it is going to be costly, some of this transition.
Do we need to just be honest with people, Justin? Because, Ryan's making... Sorry, Ryan, you finished your point.
The final point I would make is, some countries have talked about, some of the revenue that comes from green jobs, earmarking that and providing reimbursements, particularly to lower income people. So, for example, in Canada, there's kind of climate checks. I think things like that will be quite useful because there will be some costs involved, and we must make sure that the distribution of that is right, and people don't feel that it's becoming incredibly burdensome.
Justin, have Just Stop Oil won the argument with the Labour Party?
Well, look, we've always been sympathetic to the need to tackle climate change, but we certainly don't agree with their tactics, that's for sure.
Take their money, though. You take all their same sponsors.
Well, we don't actually... Well, we take our money off Dale Vince, who's the owner of Ecotricity, which is a completely different organisation to Just Stop Oil, so I wish we'd stop on that one. And if you want to get into donations the Conservative Party have got, we could spend the rest of the show on that. But... I just want to come back on what Ryan said about hydrogen, because in my constituency there's been talk about a trial for hydrogen for home heating, and it's not gone down very well because people have been looking at significant changes to their own properties, possibly higher expenses. There's been concerns about safety as well. And, overall, it's gone pretty badly. So the idea that we can change overnight without having to have some pretty difficult conversations, as Ryan has alluded to, is absolutely correct. And it will take time, but we absolutely have to do this. We cannot afford not to, and we've got to get on with it.
I'm just thinking, Zoe, do you have any other further thoughts on this particular one?
I just think that this is going to be a real challenge for leaders in every country to come. We need the green transition. There are real difficult political questions to ask. There is a lot of money involved. Labour have got this amount of money they're pledging. They need to now expand on it, what it means for people. Is it going to cost people more? Are we going to see more jobs? Where are they going to be? And just kind of inspire people in that conversation, so people can see their futures and they can see the future is green and it's not going to harm them. We see conflict, between people in the protests, the Just Stop Oil protests, or the climate protests. People are really annoyed when they can't get to work, when they can't go about their business because of protests.
It does have a negative impact, I think.
Exactly, yeah. So I think we just need to possibly change the narrative a bit and see some leadership from both parties to make the green transition seem like a positive thing, that it's going to be positive for people, positive for society, and positive for their pockets.
Okay, I think the point's well made. I still worry about baseload power and the transition and how long it's going to take, because we do need to keep the lights on because the wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. But fascinating. And it also got sparky at 8:28. There was a little bit of sparkiness on the panel breaking out here. Who knows what's going to happen after the break? You're listening to Cross Question. Get your questions in. You can phone on 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC at 8:30. The news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
The Prime Minister insists his plan to tackle small boat crossings is working. After a returns agreement with Albania, Rishi Sunak claims they're down 20% compared to last year. Stafford Boots and British Airways are among those who've had their personal details accessed in a worldwide cyber breach. Their payroll provider has been targeted. And US former Vice President Mike Pence will challenge Donald Trump in the race to the White House. He's filed the paperwork to become the Republicans' candidate. LBC weather: cloudy over much of the country tonight, a low of 6. Warm and sunny tomorrow with a high of 23.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
I'm Ali Miraj. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC with my stellar panel. Ryan Shorthouse from the think tank Bright Blue. Ryan, you're CEO and founder, but you're thinking of standing down, are you?
I am standing down later in the autumn.
What are you going to do?
That's top secret.
Oh, I thought you were going to break it.
But I am still chairing Bright Blue, so I'll still be around. So hopefully you'll still have me on Cross Question.
Okay, so your influence will still pervade, of course. Very, very good. Also, Justin Matters, the Labour MP, and also Shadow Employment Rights Minister, and your constituency is in Ellesmere Port, up in the Merseyside. And you also, there's a Sheffield University vibe going on this panel, because you went to Sheffield University, and so did Zoe Grünewald from the New Statesman as as well, so I'm not quite sure. Sheffield is certainly in the house.
After me.
Sheffield is certainly in the house, and also joined by Sir Robert Goodwill.
I went to Newcastle, by the way.
Absolutely brilliant, Uni. Very good. A Conservative MP for Scarborough and Whitby, also chairing the Environment Committee. So get your questions in 0345 6060 973 and text on 84850. Now, Anne in Harlow has got a text question. And it's this. The judge at the phone hacking trial, which Prince Harry has taken out against newspapers, says he is a little surprised that Harry didn't turn up to court today, with defence lawyers saying that he's wasting court's time. Is he just taking us all for fools now? If he can't be bothered to turn up to the court case he is involved in and he wanted to happen, what on earth is going on here? For a bit of background, the Duke of Sussex's case is against Mirror Group News. It owns the Daily and Sunday Mirror, also the Sunday People. He wasn't in court today after being in LA yesterday to celebrate his daughter Lilibet's second birthday. The judge had said that each of the witnesses should be present when their individual cases were discussed. He is expected to give evidence tomorrow. Zoe?
Well, I don't know why he didn't turn up to court. You'd think if the judge had asked for him, he probably would have liked to, especially because it's his court case. But to be honest, I feel like if he gave any excuse, a lot of people would just say he was doing it on purpose to annoy everyone. I think we spend a lot of time talking about Harry and Meghan when there's plenty of other things to speak about. I know it's frustrating for people involved in the case, and I'm sure he has his reasons, but I don't personally know why he didn't turn up.
So, Robert?
Yeah, I long stopped being interested in anything Prince Harry gets up to, and I think the same would apply to Philip Schofield too, to be honest. I think there's an important matter of principle here in people's privacy. You know, if phone hacking had been carried out, then that is an intrusion upon that. But at the same time, of course, we have journalists who are very keen that, you know, they can expose wrongdoing where there's wrongdoing. So I think it's a difficult line to lead. But certainly, if I was paying the sort of fees that I guess Harry's paying his lawyers, I think I'd like to be there to see my money spent, if nothing else.
But Justin, isn't there a point here that if you're raising an issue, you're bringing a case to court, and this is around intrusion and privacy and all of these things, it's a very important thing. And, you know, to a certain degree, I'm not Harry's biggest fan. I used to be. I even danced with him in a nightclub next to me once. But the point is, sorry, that's broken for the
Too
first
much
time.
information.
Yeah, indeed. Anyway, the point is that he may have a fair argument to make, but he can't even be bothered to turn up to court. It doesn't set the right example, does it?
Well, look, I used to be a lawyer, so I would always make it very clear that I would expect my clients to turn up at the very least. I mean, I can give you a slightly amusing anecdote about people not turning up at hearings. There was a case where my opponent said that a witness was out of the country, so was unable to attend, and the judge granted an adjournment on that basis. Out of the country turned out to be Wales.
Well, we had Stephen Kinnock on earlier. It might be, well, it is. I mean, you never know. They might be going for independence at some point. Who knows? Ryan?
Well, two things. I mean, I think he should have been there. I have a 3-year-old, and they've just had a baby. Gosh, that'd be biologically impossible. They've just had a birthday, and I don't think they're kind of conscious that much of the specific day in which they celebrate their birthday. And in fact, my wife was away, and to be honest, it became a kind of week-long birthday celebration. So I think there could have been a bit more flexibility. But the second point is, to be honest, I think the nation is getting quite bored, aren't they, of hearing about Harry and Meghan and William and Kate and all of that.
But do you think he's got a point, though, on this particular one? I know that with the soap opera element of it and whether they're part of the royal family or not is a separate issue, but on the substance of this particular case, it's a serious business.
It is a serious business, yeah. And then obviously, you know, the court will decide and what's happened. But if Harry's argument stands, then yes, it's a very serious issue, and there should be implications for that, of course.
Indeed. Well, look, we would ascertain that if you're a 3-year-old, Ryan Shorthouse's house is the best place to be in because your party will last a week. We've got a text in from Ellen in Falmouth. Why are people so scared of a universal basic income? Now, a bit of background background on this. The first trial of a universal basic income in England will be held very soon. 30 people living in Jarrow in South Tyneside and Finchley in North London will be paid £1,600 a month for 2 years. They can use that money as they see fit to do whatever they want to with it. They can also earn as much extra money as they want through working. The trial is expected to cost more than £1.6 million over the 2 years. Ryan?
I think it's a very bad idea. I'm not in favour of a universal basic income. Finland had a trial of it before the pandemic, and the evidence was not strong either way, and Finland believed, the government believed, that it didn't warrant taking it any further. And the reason I think why it's a bad idea is for several reasons. The first is this: it could be very expensive. I mean, if every person in the country gets £1,600, that's trillions that everybody would be getting. I think that's a waste of taxpayers' money. We shouldn't be directing resources to people who don't need it. Cash transfers should be to people who really do need it. Of course, then people say, well, it doesn't need to be set that high. But then the problem becomes, are you providing adequate support to people with complex needs, lots of children, for example, high housing costs, disabilities? And the purpose of the reason why we have a complex welfare system is because people have different needs, and therefore we direct resources in that way. So the danger of a universal thing is that it doesn't provide enough support, or it's too expensive. And then the final thing why I'm against it is that there is the potential for it to disincentivize work. And I think work is very important, both for material reasons, for the contribution that you make to the rest of society, but also for psychological reasons. I think some of the best effective back to work schemes, welfare schemes, are very good. Like Denmark, for example, is very good at having a low unemployment rate. It's quite generous in a time-limited way compared to what you had in your previous salary, but it's very intensive in what it expects of you. And I think that's the way forward for our welfare system. More conditions and more generosity if you meet those conditions, rather than no conditions. Yeah. And
so it disincentivises work, according to Ryan.
I could see why that would be the logic, but I don't necessarily agree that that would happen. I think if you give everyone a base payment of £1,600 a month or whatever it is, actually you might see a number of people feel able to take on more work, or able to, start up a small business, or free to go and do work and be free from certain caring responsibilities or child responsibilities. So I think it's not necessarily the case that everybody who gets this money will then decide they don't want to work. In fact, I think it might free up a lot of people. I'm kind of on the fence, to be honest, about UBI. I think there are arguments for and against. I think, one of the biggest arguments is who pays for it and how much it will cost. I think actually the OBR suggested that universal credit and legacy benefit spending is about 72 billion, whereas UBI they would predict to cost about 67 billion. So it
could actually rationalise a lot of the stuff that we're already spending on.
Correct, and obviously those are just forecasts.
But then people who really need the support with complex need wouldn't get an adequate amount.
Well, Sir Robert, you're shaking your head vigorously.
I think it's a balmy idea. We already have a system in this country where people can secure an income for their family. It's called employment. And by giving people this basic income, I think it's going to make it more difficult to get some of the young people who we can't get into the workplace, or even those people who stopped work during the pandemic, who, the 50, 60-year-olds who maybe took early retirement, to get them into work.
But what about stress and mental health? That is cited as one of the examples that, particularly in a cost of living crisis, and we did help people during furlough, that you give people a universal basic income so that they can at least live and don't have to worry about having a roof over their head.
Well, we have universal credit, and indeed, we have made some moves to change the taper so that if you do more hours or you get overtime or whatever, you can actually keep more of the money you earn. So I think if we're going to do anything in that direction, it would be improving the taper yet again to ensure that people aren't disincentivized from working. But I think it's a balmy idea, and it's been tried elsewhere and not gone down very well.
Justin Matters, I haven't noticed that this is one of Sir Keir Starmer's 5 missions. Will this be the 6th mission coming up?
I think it's probably too soon to be making those kind of commitments. I think I'm quite interested to see how this experiment works. I've got an open mind on the subject. I think there are, as we've heard, arguments for and against it. I think the part of the problem with this has been the rhetoric over the last decade or so about benefit scroungers that has created this idea that people who are in receipt of benefits get nothing in return. I also don't think that it would necessarily act as a disincentive for people to get their own employment, because this is only a basic income. People would want to improve on that. People would actually have ambitions to do things with their lives. So I'm not convinced that it would actually stop people going out and getting work. And I think looking at the long term, if we talk about artificial intelligence and how that might impact on the way the world works totally, not just in terms of this country but the whole world, you may get to a point where actually there isn't enough jobs to go around, and then you will have to look at this sort of thing.
We always say that, though, when there is innovation, don't we, Ryan?
Well, to be fair to Justin and Zoe, in the Finland trial, it didn't disincentivise work, but it was a lot lower, the amount that recipients got, than what is in the England trial. So we don't know the point in which work becomes incentivised or disincentivised. I slightly disagree with Robert in suggesting that employment is the way that you can provide adequate income. About 40% of people on universal credit are one member of the household is in work, and I don't think it's providing adequate income. The UK is a bit of an outlier compared to European countries, which often have a basic social security system, and then on top of that a social insurance scheme where they've paid in and employers have paid in so that they get quite a high replacement rate, i.e. when they come out of work for a certain period of months they get a percentage of their salary, like the furlough scheme during COVID. We don't have that in the UK, so there's a bit of a cliff edge when you come out of work, and I don't think that's right. And actually it pushes people sometimes with higher skills or medium level skills into jobs which don't match their skill set. And that may be a reason, by the way, why the UK has quite poor productivity compared to other countries, because we're not getting the matching of skills to jobs.
Well, we do have a massive productivity problem in this country. It's been lasting for well over 2 decades now. If you want to get your question into our panel on Cross Question, call 0345 60 60 973, text 84850. There's still a little bit of time left. Get your calls and texts in. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Ian Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
Welcome back to Cross Question. It's 8:47. I'm with Sir Robert Goodwill, Labour MP, Zoe Grünewald from the New Statesman, Justin Matters, Labour MP and Shadow Employment Rights Minister, and Ryan Shorthouse from the think tank Bright Blue. Our next question is from Lewis in Guildford. Good evening, Lewis. What would you like to ask?
Good evening. Thank you. My question is, does the panel believe that because we will be required to use AI technology in the near future, students should be taught how to use it right now as a priority instead of punishing them for using it?
Zoe?
Yes, I think teaching people about AI and making AI accessible and understandable to people should be a priority. I think part of the problem with AI that we've seen, which is that suddenly it seems to be a huge risk and everybody's talking about it, is that we haven't really had the capability and the understanding of how it works, and we haven't been speaking about it properly for long enough. I think also part of the problem is a lot of the expertise around AI is concentrated in Silicon Valley, and very much kind of the realm of sort of the tech bros, yes. And it's being given to us, and we are supposed to kind of be thankful for that knowledge. So I think if we can make it more accessible, less terrifying, more understandable, that can only be a good thing for everybody, and especially young people.
So more accessible and less terrifying, you're saying. Rishi Sunak's advisor on artificial intelligence, Matt Clifford, has said that AI systems will be powerful enough to kill many humans within only 2 years. And this is on the back of a lot of people within that tech sector being very, very worried. Sir Robert?
I think potentially it could kill jobs, but as we've seen over generations, when new technology comes in, other jobs spring up. You know, people were smashing the cotton gins in Lancashire when they came in. Yep. People were against the use of computers, full stop. We still have some rail unions not wanting to use new technology because they think it might destroy jobs. But, you know, actually I think that if this is used properly, it's a good tool. What I wouldn't want to see, though, is students sitting their exams using AI instead of using their own brains. And I think if that will free up time for creativity, that's a good thing. But I think there's already issues with plagiarism and people cut and pasting essays as part of their university work and school work as well. So I think we need to be very careful. But I don't think we've got the stage it's going to kill people as yet. And I hope that the scientists are sufficiently in control of this technology that they can stop that happening.
Justin, I mean, there are applications. I mean, obviously there's a question about whether it's going to wipe out humanity, but there are also very positive applications potentially of AI, particularly in education. What do you make of it?
Yes, there certainly are positive applications, and we heard last week about an ability to detect cancers. There was an antibiotic, I think, that was created through the use of AI. Obviously, none of this will matter if we're wiped out by it, but I think you know, if it's properly controlled and regulated, it will be a force for good. But I worry at the moment that the horse has already bolted, and we're desperately trying to catch up.
You mentioned regulation. I mean, in the upper echelons of the Labour Party, are you having live discussions around what regulation would look like right now on AI?
Yes, part of my job is the future of work,
yes.
And we are looking at this particularly from a workers' rights perspective, particularly in terms of transparency about how algorithms are used. The right to access whatever data is being used on you, the right to switch off when you're working from home. Transparency, I think, is really important in all this, and I think at the moment there are probably lots of AI systems that are already in place and we don't even know that they're being used. And I think that, you know, legislation is very specific in the way it works, and it's quite a clunky way of dealing with something that is really moving ahead at a pace.
Okay, right.
I mean, it is moving, the development of it, very quickly. I mean, nobody 8 months ago really was talking about Chat GPT, but it's been integrated a lot, certainly as our think tank, and is a very good learning tool. Now, 10 years ago, people were talking about automation, and that would kind of lead to loads of job losses. But here we are, obviously, with, near record levels of employment. But this is very nascent where we are with ChatGPT and generative AI. And, for example, Italy banned it for certain months because it was said not to be compliant with GDPR. And then there was a study that looked at the firms that were using it, and it was sort of like a 30% productivity drop once it was banned. So you can see how it can really help. And there are job losses happening at the moment. BT, for example, have talked about customer services. So I think what's really needed is regulation, and that's a kind of framework and guidance for people who are designing AI technology in companies that are growing, making sure they're also, making sure to people, making sure that they have the information that when they're looking at something or watching something, that it's, that's come from AI, and that's going to be very important in a democratic sense as well. But having transparency over that is also going to be
Indeed. I want to get in another question from Hassan in Westminster. Good evening, Hassan. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, hi there. Inheritance tax is paid by 4% of households. Should these households be given an additional tax break as requested by the Tory party, or should sort of other wider taxes like VAT, etc., be reduced for the benefit of all of us?
So, Robert?
I think inheritance is very important. People build during their lives, their savings, they buy their properties, and they want to leave it to their children. You remember when Gordon Brown nearly called an election and George Osborne made an announcement on inheritance tax, and everybody's sort of said, well, actually, yes, this is a very unfair tax. There's already big allowances. You have 325,000 personal allowance, which is with an additional 175 if a property is concerned. So I think we have got generous allowances. And it's often said that inheritance tax is only paid by people who don't have a good accountant, and certainly you can make lifetime
But it affects the middle taxes. And look, I remember George Osborne, who Justin stood against back in Tatton, back in the day, saying that this would be abolished, and it hasn't been abolished. The Tories haven't delivered on inheritance tax. They've talked a good game, but not delivered.
The vast majority of people are taken out of inheritance tax. There's the relief for people with businesses, there's relief for agricultural land, there's relief for rented land. So there are a lot of reliefs out there. And as I say, if you make a lifetime gift and live for 7 years, you also can protect that from inheritance tax. So I think the key is to plan and don't play into the hands of the taxman, because inheritance tax is in many ways a voluntary tax, and if people plan their lives and organise themselves, they can probably escape the very worst of it. And certainly in the north of England, where houses aren't worth a fortune like they are in London, not many people fall into the inheritance tax band.
And I think it's... Sorry.
Sorry. Go on.
Yeah.
Well, I think inheritance tax is a very progressive form of taxation that can help to eliminate a lot of intergenerational unfairness. I think in this country we have a huge amount of rich people with a lot of wealth consolidated, and I think if you're a young person, one of the biggest factors of whether or not you will have much money when you're growing up is how rich your parents are, and whether they can leave you any. So I think that's unfair. I think we need to make the system fairer. Young people need more help with their finances, and I think we need a system that's much more progressive, where young people aren't just at the mercy of how wealthy their parents are.
We need to make the system fairer, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Zoe. If there's going to be any tax cuts, and the Treasury has room to do that, it should be on work and working age people, and particularly younger people. That should be the priority. Look, the idea that inheritance tax hits kind of average middle-class people, I mean, it's totally a myth. I mean, most people, when they receive a family home through inheritance, most people get that through married parents. One dies first and then another dies afterwards. There's a £1 million allowance for that. The home can go to you. Most people, house prices have risen, but most people do not have £1 million properties. So, this idea that 325,000 is the sort of threshold to paying 40% inheritance tax is not true.
But in London, it captures with rising house prices. A lot of people will be affected in the middle classes, won't they?
I would say that that's probably upper middle class, to be honest, if you're going to be, people who own £1 million properties.
Okay. Justin?
Well, look, we've got no proposals at the moment to tinker with inheritance tax. I think
no, read my lips, no more taxes, moment.
I think as if you've alluded to it sets hairs running, and it's something that we all remember from 2008. It sort of flipped things for the Conservative Party, but I don't think the majority of my constituents will be paying inheritance tax, and I'm very interested by Robert's comment that it's almost a voluntary tax, which slightly worries me.
And also, a lot of the proponents say it's double taxation, but everybody has double taxation every day.
Well, they say that
you've paid your tax on on your earnings, and then you pay VAT. But actually, with inheritance tax, there isn't a double taxation, because the source of that income, which is the inheritance, the person who's receiving has never paid tax on it first.
Let me see if I can get two questions in, but we've got to be very, very pithy. So, Carl in Weston-super-Mare says, Donald Trump's former Vice President Mike Pence is running against him to become the next president. Could he beat him, or is a Trump victory in the Republican race inevitable? Justin?
I certainly hope not. It's probably my quick answer to that.
You're sitting on the fence on that one, Zoe.
You're not going to like it, Ali, but I agree with Justin. I hope not.
And so, Robert, are you a Trump fan?
No. A country as big as America, you'd think they could find some decent people.
Well, you would have thought 300 million people.
What a shame Mr. Johnson gave up his American citizenship. He could have run.
Indeed, Ryan.
Well, actually, there's interesting polling on what the average British Conservative voter thinks compared to the average Republican voter on many social issues. And the Republicans are a lot more to the right. The UK Conservatives are much more aligned with US Democrats on a lot of social issues, whether it's abortion, for example.
So I think that's a very diplomatic way of saying you're not in favour of the Trump in the Trump corner.
What do you think?
You're smiling, Riley. There. Okay, look, we're coming just to the end, and I want to get in the what we call the fun question, which instills fear into the hearts of everyone on the panel. And it's from Dom in Preston, who says, Lidl is going to be the next supermarket to start vacuum packing their mince. But customers around the country are saying it turns the meat into mush. What food makes your panel squeamish? So, Robert.
It may look like mush, but it's just the same mince. Oysters. But when I was fishing minister, they made me eat them at almost every place. And I started to get used to them. I started to tolerate them, and now I actually like them. So anyone who doesn't like oysters, persevere, because they're actually delicious when you get used to them.
Fantastic. Zoe.
Ketchup. I hate ketchup.
It's already quite mushy, isn't it? Ketchup. I mean, it's liquid form.
It just reminds me of kids running around at school with it all caked around their mouths and down their tops. It just turns my stomach.
Okay, Justin.
Any seafood, basically. Anything out.
Not a fan?
No, just doesn't agree with me.
Oh, okay, interesting. And Ryan.
I just have this weird thing about aeroplane food. I just don't like eating. I think it's just the dry air and everything. Every time it comes out on the trays, I never eat it. It just gives me the creeps.
Well, look, interesting. We've all got our personal squeamish things there. Fascinating panel. Thanks very much indeed for joining me. It's been a pleasure having you, Justin Madders, Sir Robert Goodwill, Zoe Grünewald and Ryan Shorthouse. I'm very grateful for you coming in this evening. Now, in the next hour, I wanted to turn to this very interesting piece in The Guardian entitled Labour Rising Star Threatens to Evict Families If Children Do Not Inform on Knife Crime. This is Darren Rodwell, who says his council will start looking at tenancy agreements if children and families refuse to speak out. Now, he's a rising figure in the Labour Party. He's threatening to evict families if their children do not inform on people who commit knife crime. He's the leader of Barking and Dagenham Council. He's made the threat because this is an issue that is growing exponentially, not just in London, but in many areas around the country. Should you be evicted from your home if your kids don't inform on perpetrators of knife crime to the police?